Hey, y'all remember class guides? Howdy, my name is Nonat, and welcome to the slightly overdue deep dive into the Sorcerer class for Pathfinder 2e. It's been a little bit, but we're here, and that's all that matters. Before jumping into the thick of it, I do want to let you know that this video will not be covering Bloodlines. That will be coming out next week, or if it's already out, I will try to remember to put a link in the description to that video. It's going to be its own completely separate one, going over the Bloodlines, their bonuses, and their focus spells. For the sake of my sanity and avoiding a 2-hour-long video, they will not be featured in this one. I will go over what a Bloodline is, and then we'll jump right ahead into the rest of the class features. With that being said, go check out Sinclair's library, link in the description. That's the entire sponsored segment. You're welcome. We're not wasting any more time. Let's put me in a little bubble in the corner of the page and get talking about the Sorcerer. The Sorcerer is, surprisingly, a spellcaster. 6 hit points per level and a charisma-focused caster, much like the Bard. Trained in perception, trained in fortitude, trained in reflex, and expert in will. Much like a lot of spellcasters, sorcerers are incredibly squishy and easy to take down, at least with their base stats. They only get 2 plus their intelligence modifier in skill trainings, but they do get an additional skill based on their bloodline. Trained in simple weapons and unarmed strikes, and only trained in unarmored defense, your sorcerer likely will not be wearing any armor. At level 1, you're really only looking at your bloodline and your spellcasting. That's about it. It's an early game spellcaster in Pathfinder 2e. Aside from your spell selection, there's not going to be a lot of choice. Acting as if spell selection isn't a lot of choice. But the big choice for sorcerers is their bloodline. There are so many bloodlines. I'll even put a list on screen so you can see why I'm not covering all of them in this video. Now, the bloodline is probably the single most important thing you will pick as a sorcerer. Not only does it give you access to unique focus spells, a specific skill training, and a unique blood magic effect, but it determines which spell list you can use. The sorcerer is the only class in the core rulebook that can use any of the 4 spell lists, arcane, divine, primal, and occult, as the same class. It'll also grant you specific spells you add at each spell level, and this is a heavy limitation of the sorcerer. You can see over just here as the demonic bloodline as an example, the granted spells such as Acid Splash as a cantrip and Fear as a first level spell. These are chosen for you and do count against your prepared spells per day. Not prepared, but your repertoire. Looking at the sorcerer's spell list, they typically know as many spells as they can cast per day, and at level 1, they only get 3 first level spells, and if you are demonic, one of those has to be Fear, so you only get to choose 2 of them. Same goes for the cantrip. 1 has to be Acid Splash, and the other 4 you get to choose. This is true of every spell level up through 9th. And you might already know this from how I just explained it, but yes, sorcerers are spontaneous casters, meaning they do not need to prepare specific spells each day, but they are heavily limited on the number of spells they know. For example, at first level, you only know 3 spells. You can cast any of them in any order or use all of your slots on the same one, but you cannot change those spells without downtime or leveling up. From there on, they're pretty simple. 2nd level skill feats, they get sorcerer feats starting at 2nd level, general feats at 3rd level, and the signature spell feature at 3rd level. All spontaneous casters get this, and you get to pick a single spell from each spell level that can be freely heightened at will. If you choose Magic Missile as your 1st level signature spell, you can upcast it to 3rd level without adding it to your repertoire at 3rd level. This is not made super clear, so let me just say it right here and now. If you are a spontaneous caster and you have Magic Missile at 1st level, if you want to cast Magic Missile with a 3rd level spell slot, you either need to make it a signature spell or learn it again. This is something a lot of people don't understand about the sorcerer, and it's fair, it's a fairly complex facet of their spellcasting. But note how at level 5, they know 4 1st level spells and 3 3rd level spells. If Magic Missile is not your signature spell, you can have Magic Missile count towards one of your 1st level spells, but if you want it at 3rd level, it will also count against one of your 3rd level spells. They will count as 2 separate spells in your repertoire, unless it is a signature spell. Skill increases, ability boosts, ancestry feats, general stuff. 5th level sees fortitude saves increase to expert, 7th level sees spell DCs and spell attack rolls increase to expert, and 9th level sees reflex saves increase to expert. Boys, spellcaster level ups on base class features are boring. Level 11, perception is expert. Level 11, weapons are expert. Only simple. 13, unarmored defense is expert. 13, weapons deal +2 damage because you're just expert with weapon specialization. Level 15, you're a master spellcaster. Level 17, you are master will saves. God, this is simple. And then finally, level 19, you get legendary with spellcasting and you get 1 10th level spell slot to prepare. Now you only get 1 slot, but you do get 2 spells. You can learn any 2 10th level spells from your Bloodlines spell list and cast 1 of them per day. And that's it. Aside from Bloodlines, we're on to feats. I'm sure I've said this in the past, but spellcasters are pretty simple when it comes to leveling up class features. Their spell selection gives them their complexity, so their base mechanics are not really even mechanics at all. They're mostly just stat increases. So let's talk class feats, starting with Counterspell. I'm not going over this. Watch it in that video. I'll link it in the description. It is complicated, but I explained it really well like a year ago. Dangerous Sorcery, a really popular one. When you cast a spell using a spell slot, that spell deals bonus damage equal to the level of spell slot. It's not a bunch of extra damage, but if you want your acid arrow to deal 1 extra damage, you can. Keep in mind, this has some interesting interactions with something like Magic Missile. Magic Missile, if you shoot 3 missiles at the same target, you still only get +1 damage from Dangerous Sorcery. But because Magic Missile's damage is clumped together per target, if you shoot Magic Missile at 3 different targets, each of them gets +1 damage. Dangerous Sorcery will only apply to a spell's target once, so if you can target multiple things, you will get much better rewards from Dangerous Sorcery. Familiar. You get a familiar. Reach spell and widen spell. We've talked about these like 6 times and we'll keep talking about them. You can make your spell reach 30 feet farther or increase the width of your spell's area of effect. Over in the Advanced Player's Guide, we have Ancestral Blood Magic, which is literally useless until like 5th level or higher. This is a really weirdly worded feat, and nobody's been able to understand why it works so poorly. With Ancestral Blood Magic, if you cast a spell slot spell from an Ancestry or Heritage feat, you get your blood magic like you do with your Sorcerer spells. I don't know why this is a level 1 feat, because no level 1 Heritage or Ancestry gives a spell slot spell. Tons of them give cantrips, but this only works on non-cantrips. So why this is level 1 is beyond me. Cantrip expansion. You get to prepare 2 more cantrips, and I won't badmouth it this time because the comments got really mad at me when I badmouthed cantrip expansion. Enhanced Familiar. Your familiar gets 2 more abilities per day. Anoint Ally for 1 action allows you to put a rune on an ally that lasts for 1 minute. During that minute, whenever you would cast a non-cantrip spell and activate your Sorcerer's blood magic effect, you can give the effect to your ally. For example, if something gives you +1 to diplomacy checks for 1 round, you can give that to your ally instead of yourself. You can only anoint 1 ally at a time. If you anoint somebody else, the original rune goes away. Entreat with Forebears is really interesting, especially if you're playing a sorcerer who is thematic with the campaign you're in. While engaging with creatures of the same type as your bloodline, for example, if you have an undead bloodline and you're fighting undead, you get +1 to diplomacy, deception, and intimidation, as well as +1 to perception checks against them, and +1 to all saving throws against effects originating from those targets. Level 4 already! Boy, I forgot how few feats spellcasters get. Arcane Evolution, a really cool feat only available to bloodlines that offer the arcane spell list. You get a receptacle similar to a wizard's spellbook, and using Arcana and paying the appropriate gold cost, you can copy down spells and add them to a book, which normally sorcerers cannot do. During your daily preparations, you can pick 1 spell in your spellbook, quote unquote, and add that to your repertoire. Now remember, you have to pick a specific level for this, but if you have a spell you already know, like Magic Missile, and you put Magic Missile in your book, then Magic Missile can become a signature spell without counting against your normal signature spell allotment. So this means you can have 2 signature spells of the same spell slot level. I know this is getting really confusing. Trust me, it's not that bad. You just get an extra signature spell. I like to over-explain things and usually make things more complicated than they need to be. But overall, it's just a great way to get an extra spell in your repertoire, which is usually super limited. Bespell Weapon, always one of my favorites to see on a spellcaster. As a free action, after casting a non-cantrip spell, you imbue the weapon you're holding with a little bit of residual energy from that spell, and your next attack with that weapon deals an extra 1d6 damage of the corresponding damage type, depending on the school of magic cast, which you can see in the feat. Oh, it's actually not even just the next attack. It is until the end of your turn. So if you cast a single action spell like True Strike and then attack, I think that's enchantment or abjuration. So you pretty good combo there. True Strike, attack with advantage, dealing 1d6 bonus damage, and then if you're lucky enough to somehow hit on the second attack, that's 2d6 extra damage you just did. Not bad. The only downside is Bespell Weapon doesn't scale with level, so whether you cast this at level 4 or level 20, it's still only 1d6 bonus damage. Divine Evolution, obviously only for the Divine spell list, you get 1 additional spell slot per day automatically at the highest spell level you can cast, but it must be used to cast Heal or Harm. This is fantastic. It doesn't count against your repertoire, so you don't even need to know how to cast Heal or Harm. You just get an extra spell per day to heal someone or harm someone, and it's your choice. Every day, it's your choice. If you need the healing on the spot, you can use that. If the fight's about to end and you can finish it, you can just cast a max level harm. It's amazing. This feat is incredible for divine sorcerers. Occult Evolution. Are you sensing a theme here? You become trained in one skill of your choice, for some reason, not sure why, and once per day during your daily preparations, you can add 1 occult mental spell to your repertoire as though you know it, and it does not count against your repertoire total. It just specifically has to have the mental trait, which luckily a lot of occult spells do. And the Primal Evolution for the Primal spell list, similar to Heal and Harm, you get 1 spell slot at your highest level that can only be filled with Summon Plant or Summon Animal. Overall, these evolution feats are fantastic. I think Arcane might actually be the weakest, except maybe Occult, there's arguments for both. But Arcane, you need to find the spell. Even the Occult one, you can just add any mental spell to your repertoire for the day. The Primal and the Divine have such... it's an extra spell slot. It's just a straight up extra spell slot, which is huge. The Arcane one just has the most limitations, and that holds it back from the rest. Elaborate Flourish is a cool concept that will almost never come up in execution. For 1 action, you use this metamagic, and if your next action is to cast a spell, opposing creatures have a -2 to their attempt to recall knowledge to identify the spell you're casting. The most you can see with this is it gives you a higher chance to not be counterspelled. Remember, counterspell is not automatic in PF2, there are opposing checks to your DC, and it does give the penalty to both recall knowledge to identify it and -2 to the check to counterspell. This is a metamagic just if you're really scared of getting counterspelled, and maybe on something like a divine sorcerer who focuses on healing, this could actually be really good. If you want to elaborate flourish and then heal, the opposing clerics can't counterspell as effectively. But I'll say right now, as a GM or as a player, I've never seen a spell get counterspelled except maybe by a player once, so counterspell doesn't come up a lot from enemies, just gonna say that. Split Shot's cool, a lot cooler on paper than it is on practice, but for 1 action, you activate this metamagic, and if your next action is to cast a spell that only deals damage and has 0 additional effects, you can instead shoot it at 2 separate targets, using 1 attack roll against their ACs, and then if it hits, it deals half damage to both targets. If you're fighting a ton of enemies and you want to stay far away, yeah, you could split shot Ray of Frost and maybe snipe out 2 little goblins in a fight, but overall, this isn't going to be super useful when you're level 4. Next level you get Fireball and you'll have plenty of other multi-target abilities. It's cool, not super effective. Advanced Bloodline, you get an extra focus point and a new Bloodline spell. Steady spellcasting, really specific but really helpful when it comes in clutch. From now on, if someone uses a reaction and hits you like an attack of opportunity that interrupts spellcasting, rather than it automatically succeeding, you get a 25% chance to succeed by rolling a DC 15 flat check. If you succeed, the spell still goes off. Pretty nice. But also not as good as Advanced Bloodline. Like, who's not gonna take Advanced Bloodline there? Diverting Vortex is okay. For one action, if you just cast a non-cantrip spell, you get +1 to AC. Only against ranged attacks. Not against spell attacks, not against melee attacks. Strictly ranged weapon and unarmed attacks. That's the only thing the AC bonus applies to. For a level 6 feat, just cast shield. It's a cantrip. Almost everybody has shield unless you're primal. Now, this does stack with shield, as shield is a circumstance bonus and this is a status bonus, so I guess if you cast a 1-action spell slot spell, you could follow it up with shield and diverting vortex and get a pretty solid AC bump, but that's a lot of hoops to jump through. Energetic resonance is cool. It's a cool thing to have in your back pocket. As a reaction, if you would take energy damage, which is acid, cold, electric, fire, sonic, you can expend a spell slot of a level higher or equal to the spell that just hit you. When you do so, you gain resistance to that damage type equal to double the spell's level. If you're being shot by a level 3 acid arrow, you can expend a level 3 spell slot to reduce the damage by 6. It's really niche, could come in handy, but at the end of the day, you're sacrificing an entire spell, an entire level 3 spell at that, to basically save 6 hit points. It's just not that worth it. Even if you're like level 15, sacrificing a 7th level spell slot to save 14 hit points? Maybe if you're arcane and you have no other survivability, that's worth it, but if you're like a divine sorcerer, you could just use that spell slot at level 7 to heal for what, 7d8 plus 56? A little better than 14 hit points. I will say this is more useful if the spell somehow hits you multiple times and you gain resistance against every single hit. That is better, but it's incredibly niche. Spell Relay is one of the coolest feats in the game, and I've never seen anyone take it, which makes me sad. As a reaction, your ally, when they cast a spell, can use you as the origin point of that spell. It uses your reaction, but if your wizard is 30 feet behind you, they can cast Fireball, and it comes from you and can fly its full distance using you as the base point, giving it almost a 30-foot range extension on the spells they cast. This is also helpful if you're around a corner, you're standing behind someone who has cover from the wizard can cast it from you, removing that cover. There's a lot of really cool ways to use this, and I want to see it more. It's one of the very rare teamwork feats in Pathfinder 2e, and I don't think there's enough of that. Bloodline resistance. +1 status bonus to saving throws against spells and magical effects. It's good. It's boring, but it's good. Cross-blooded evolution. This is an entire feat which lets you take one spell from a spell list other than your own and add it to your repertoire. And anytime you could swap spells, like with downtime or leveling up, you can swap in a new spell. For example, if you're arcane and you want a little bit of healing, you could take Cross-Blooded Evolution to add heal at your highest spell level. And every time you level up, just add it at your new highest spell level. It's a great way to get some extra support for a spell list that might be lacking something. Safeguarded Spell is a really cool way to get away with some self-focused fireballs. For one action metamagic, if your next action is to cast a spell that has an effect in an area, you are not affected. This means you can safeguard, cast fireball, and throw it at your feet and you will take no damage. Super cool. Soul Sight, if you can cast from the divine or occult spell list, you gain Spirit Sense. It's honestly pretty decent. You gain a 60-foot emanation around you where you can just sense the spirits of living things. If you are outside of an abandoned hut, you can basically side up to it, and similar to trying to hear something inside, your GM will be able to tell you, yes, you detect living spirits inside, or no, you do not. You don't get any actual information about them, but you know they're there. Very great for finding something around a corner, or like I said, finding out if there's someone inside of a house without actually going in. Greater Bloodline. You get the Greater Bloodline spell and your third focus point. Overwhelming Energy, one of the best metamagics. For one action, if your next action is to cast a spell that deals a specific type of damage, you get to ignore an enemy's resistance equal to double the spell's level. Sorry, equal to your level. That'll typically be the same, sometimes it'll actually be one higher. An important thing it notes is that this applies to the damage as long as the spell lasts. So if you use this metamagic and put it on something like Wall of Fire, which lasts multiple rounds, it overcomes the resistance the entire duration. Very nice for things that hit multiple times. Oh, sorry, I should clarify, it only works for energy damage. Acid, Cold, Electric, Fire, Sonic. And the level 10 feat most people will take is Quicken Casting. As a free action, once per day, reduce the amount of actions needed to cast a spell by 1 to a minimum of 1. 1 action Fireball, followed by a 2 action Fireball? Pretty good. I will say the limitation is that it has to be 2 levels lower than your highest level spell slot. If you're level 10, you have level 5 spells. So you get to throw out a level 3 Fireball and then a level 5 Fireball. That's what? 66 for level 3, 10d6 for level 5, so just 16d6 damage in a 20-foot burst up to 500 feet away. That's pretty good at level 10. Ancestral Mage requiring the Ancestral Blood Magic feat from level 1 is, again, it's okay, but it's not great. Any spell slot spell you get from your ancestry or heritage is now officially part of your repertoire, not counting against your total repertoire spells, meaning you might be able to cast them multiple times per day. If, as a random example, you're a dwarf sorcerer and your spell list doesn't have meld into stone, well, with this feat, your repertoire now has meld into stone, meaning you can cast it as many times as you have spell slots for at that level. It's cool. It's not that exciting, but you might be able to get a spell you can cast multiple times per day that normally you couldn't. Energy Fusion, again, really cool, but costs a lot of resources for what it does. For 1 action, you activate this metamagic, and if your next action is to cast a spell that deals energy damage, you can sacrifice a spell slot, and if you have a spell in your repertoire that deals a different type of energy damage, you get to shoot the normal spell as is, but the damage is divided in half, and it becomes half energy type 1, half energy type 2. So it still does the full damage, but it's half and half. Good for overcoming specific resistances, or hitting 2 different resistances, meaning you apply the weakness twice. The spell slot expended does need to be the same level as the original one, so this is really good if you want to use it on 1st or 2nd level spells, if you want to hit those weaknesses, but it's not as worth it if you use it for your high level stuff. Oh, the last thing I missed is that it does do bonus damage equal to the level of the slot you expended, so it might deal 5 extra damage if you're doing this with your high level slots. Energy Ward is actually fantastic. As a free action once per turn, if your most recent action was to cast a non-cantrip spell that dealt energy damage, you gain resistance 5 to that element. Now, the downside here is that unless you're fighting other spellcasters, chances are you're not going to be using the element of the target against them. If you're fighting a fire elemental, you're not going to cast a fire spell on them, so Signature spell expansion isn't bad at all, actually. You gain 2 additional signature spells. They must be for spells of 3rd level or lower, which sounds bad, but remember, a signature spell can be heightened at will, so this can take something like Magic Missile, I know I keep bringing it up, but it's an easy example, and now, without spending any of your other signature spells, you could raise it to 5th level without spending anything. I mean, except for a 5th level spell slot. But yeah, pretty cool. Bloodline Focus. When you refocus, you get 2 focus points back instead of 1. Magic Sense. You are permanently affected as though you were channeling a 1st level detect magic spell, and whenever you take the Seek action, you are automatically affected by a 3rd level detect magic spell. Is this amazing? Kind of. It'll help you get not caught off guard as much by magical stuff, because you don't have to actively cast the spell, but these are just cantrips, remember. Blood component substitution is really, really cool. It's not overpowered in any way, but will be very useful in some roleplay situations. If you sacrifice hit points equal to double the spell's level, you remove any and all material, somatic, and verbal components, meaning you also remove the manipulate trait. Now, it does still have the concentrate trait, but otherwise, this is a silent spell. It's like the silent spell metamagic, but way stronger. What this means is even if you are tied up and can't perform the somatic components, you can still just like anime style, bite your cheek, sacrifice the blood, and still cast the spell. Honestly, super cool. I will say though, it does say that you will crackle with magical energy, so maybe it won't cover the silent spell perfectly. Greater Physical Evolution is for primal and arcane sorcerers and does give you another spell in your repertoire. Technically, a bunch of them. If you have this feat, you can cast any battle form polymorph spell, like Dragon Form for example, and just have it in your repertoire as a signature spell. It doesn't count against your total spells known, and you can cast it at any appropriate level. Now the big thing here is it does need to be a common spell, but if you have Arcane Evolution, you can choose any battle form spell, even if it's uncommon, and if you have Primal Evolution, you can just use the extra spell slot that you get from Primal Evolution for the polymorph. On the other hand, Spiritual Evolution for Divine and Occult get a really interesting and drastically different effect. From now on, all of your spells are affected by the same effects as the Ghost Touch weapon rune, meaning they deal bonus damage to anything with a weakness to Ghost Touch. Additionally, you can both damage creatures on the ethereal plane and damage creatures who have a projection of themselves before you. If an enemy is hiding in a tower somewhere, but they've cast Project Image and are talking to you with basically a hologram, your spells, if you know it's a projection, can still hurt the original body. Very cool feat. Very, very neat. That was a rhyme and I didn't expect it to be. 14th level, we're getting into some really unique stuff now, like Interweave Dispel. For one action, you activate the metamagic, and if your next action is to cast a single target spell, and that spell hits the target, you get to cast Dispel Magic on that target as a free action. Now, it still consumes the extra spell slot, but this is 2 spells for the price of 1. So it's 1 action and then 2 actions, but you're still saving an action and casting 2 2-action spells on the same turn. It has to be Dispel Magic, but Dispel Magic is great. And it's not like a once per day, it's pretty dang good, honestly. Get rid of that shield spell on the target. Get rid of anything giving them bonus armor class or flight or anything of the sort. Dispel Magic is underutilized. Reflect Spell. Your counterspell now turns the effect back on the caster. Even if it's an area of effect like a fireball, it still only hurts the original caster, and the caster does get a chance to make a saving throw or roll their own spell attack roll against their own AC. Really cool, really fun. I don't know how often you'll be able to do it, but being able to counterspell something and turn it right back at the original source is super satisfying. Consume Spell is less cool than Reflect Spell, but is really fun for certain character concepts. When you successfully counterspell, you eat it. I'm not kidding. If you successfully counterspell a spell, you gain the nourishment as though you had just eaten a meal, and you regain hit points equal to double the level of the spell. It's funny. Honestly, this is a funny feat. I'm not even mad about it. It's not that powerful, but it'd be really cool to see the Lich cast the Ray of Enfeeblement, and you counterspell and just eat it. Spell Shroud, another metamagic, you activate it, and then if your next action is to cast a spell, then the residual energy of that spell creates a dense magical mist that emits 15 feet around you. Effortless Concentration. Once per day as a free action, you can auto-sustain a spell as a free action rather than spending the required action. Greater Mental Evolution is okay. You get an extra spell at every single level of your repertoire. This does not give you any more spell slots, but it does give you more options. Personally, Greater Vital Evolution for Divine and Primal casters are way better! Twice per day, if you run out of spell slots from a single spell level you can cast, you can just cast another one. That's simple. If you're level 16 and you run out of 8th level spell slots, you get another 8th level spell. Now, the second one has to be a different level. You can't do 8th again, but there's no level requirements. So as long as you use all your 8th and all your 7th level spells, you get another one of both, which is huge. And I'm way ahead of you. You cannot use this feat to get an extra 10th level spell slot. 10th level spells specifically cannot be used for abilities that let you cast spells without expending spell slots. Because specifically, the feat we're talking about doesn't give you another spell slot, it just lets you cast a spell for free, which cannot be done with 10th level spell slots. Scintillating Spell is okay, only because it still works on cantrips. You activate the metamagic for one action, and then for your next action, if you cast a spell, a big burst of light accompanies it. Now, this only works on spells that require a reflex save, such as Fireball, but any creature affected by the spell has an additional effect depending on the result of their reflex save. If they fail, they are dazzled for 1 round, not a big deal, but if they crit fail, they are blinded for 1 round. The most useful I can think of this is basically making Electric Arc better. For an extra action, Electric Arc now dazzles and blinds. It's cool on something like a Fireball, but with the duration only being 1 round, it's not that crazy. Especially when you compare it to the other level 16 spells of just extra spells or extra spells in your repertoire, this is a lot weaker. Terraforming Spell, also fine, I guess. For 1 action, you activate the metamagic, and if your next action is to cast a non-cantrip spell, specifically for this one, then either every space adjacent to you becomes difficult terrain, or if it already was, it is no longer difficult terrain. That's it. It doesn't work on cantrips. Like, removing a couple spaces of difficult terrain isn't that big a deal. Maybe it would let you step, but I see very few uses for this, and again, compared to extra spells, it's just not worth it. Level 18, Bloodline Wellspring. Now you get 3 focus points back when you refocus. Greater Cross-Blooded Evolution is actually kind of insane. You need to have taken Cross-Blooded Evolution earlier, but now you get 3 extra spells in your repertoire from spell lists other than your own. Now, each of these spells has to be at a different level, but they can all be from different lists. You can take 3 Divine spells, you can take 2 Primal and an Occult spell. Any mix you want. This is the ultimate spell customization that you can get in Pathfinder 2e. Echoing Spell is okay. For 1 action, as a metamagic, if your next action is to cast a 4th level or lower spell, then before the end of your next turn, you can cast it again without spending a slot. This means all of your spells of 4th level or lower, you can almost double your spell slots, which is cool, don't get me wrong. That keeps you going, especially for spells that just require a spell DC. That's pretty good. But for most offensive spells, you're level 18. You have access to 9th level spells. 4th level and lower is not going to do all that much damage, but you might be able to put on some cool status effects and conditions. So for those, for something like Fear, Echoing Spell is actually pretty good. And level 20, what do we got for capstones? We have Bloodline Conduit. Once per minute, you can activate this metamagic, and if your next action is to cast a spell of 5th level or lower, it doesn't consume the spell slot. Very similar to the one we just talked about, you can use this to sort of double your total spell slots, but it's only once per minute. I actually think the one at level 18 was better, because at least you can do that as many times as you want. This one, it's not great. I think I would have preferred once per day of any level than once per minute of 5th level. This is fantastic for out-of-combat things like healing. If you're a Divine Sorcerer and you have Bloodline Conduit, sure, you can wait a little bit, but that means once per minute, you can just infinitely heal. Over 10 minutes, you can cast 10 5th level heal spells for free. Bloodline Perfection, you get a second 10th level spell slot. Not to be undersold. It's pretty good, it's pretty simple, it's fun. Metamagic Mastery is fine. Your metamagics now are free actions instead of 1 action. The problem is you still only have 3 actions on a turn, and most spells cost 2. So maybe you can get away with metamagic 2-action spell, metamagic 1-action spell, but they're very few and far between. The 1-action spells that are incredibly effective, there's not that many of them. Sure, there's Shield, and maybe you can do something cool with metamagic on Shield, but nothing I can think of off the top of my head. It's a cool idea in concept, but I just don't think there's enough unique metamagics to make it work. I will say this does allow you to move into position metamagic and cast a 2-action spell, and that's really good. That shouldn't be undersold because typically you can't move metamagic spell. And Bloodline Mutation is... well, it's good for roleplay. you take on the traits of the source of your bloodline. For example, if you are angelic bloodline, you might grow angel wings. You get low light or dark vision, depending on what your bloodline creature would have, and choose one of the following. If the creature associated with your bloodline can fly like angels, you gain a fly speed equal to your land speed. Not bad by any means, but you can also just cast fly. If the creatures within your bloodline are amphibious or aquatic, you can breathe underwater and gain a swim speed equal to your land speed. There's also really low-level spells for that. And if your bloodline has some connection with a specific type of energy, like elemental, you gain resistance 20 against that one type of energy, which is fine, I guess. But what would you rather have? Resistance 20 against one type of damage, or an extra 10th level spell slot, or infinite 5th level spells? This is not good. I'm sorry, I don't see why anyone would ever take Bloodline Mutation over... Like if you take... if you take the infinite 5th level spells, what's it called? If you take Bloodline Conduit, you can just cast Fly, or Water Breathing. Or I'm sure there's a 5th level or lower spell that gives you resistance to energy, right? Yeah, Resist Energy is a level 2 spell that lasts for 10 minutes, and if you cast it as a 4th level spell, it targets 2 creatures. So you could just cast it on yourself and an ally, wait a minute, on 2 other people, and then you've still got like 9 minutes left on the spell. It's just worse. Literally every effect of Bloodline Mutation can be mimicked with a 5th level or lower spell, which you can have infinite of with Bloodline Conduit. I hate to say it, this might be the worst level 20 feat in the game. I might be wrong, I might be forgetting something else that's even worse, but this is rough, bro. And I hate to leave it on such a sour note, but that's the Sorcerer! Overall, they have a lot of really cool stuff. I love the focus on metamagic and using spells in new and creative ways with the little different effects of the metamagic. I just wish there was more. Honestly, and maybe there is that I'm missing out. I only covered the core rulebook and advanced player's guide in these videos. If they added something in like Secrets of Magic or Gods and Magic that I'm missing, let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Are you playing a sorcerer right now? If so, tell me about your character. You know I love hearing about your characters, or if you're planning to play a sorcerer, what kind of bloodline? Be on the lookout next week for my bloodline guide because, boy, that's going to be a long video. I think we're going to be covering no less than like 60, 70 spells. Like the video, leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Shout out to my patrons on this list. You guys are amazing, and thank you for keeping me doing what I'm doing. Don't forget to check out Sinclair's library using the link below, and I'm done listing off things you should do. I'm just going to tell you that I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and until next time, no nat ones.